something came up on social media the other day, a discussion about Sufism, and I had this feeling about Sufism that it was one of these British projects. So I did what I usually do. I go to Executive Intelligence Review, and I found this fantastic article. Executive Intelligence Review, Volume 10, number 20, 24th of May, 1983. So we're back in the territory that I'm most interested in. Networks and ideology of the Sufi cult spread throughout the Mediterranean region by Thierry Lalave. And it goes into the greater subject of the British manipulation of cults and the use of cults, which of course is a tradition that goes back to the Venetians and even earlier back to Babylon. The ability to create cults that play into very deep layers of the human psyche and then to tease out from these deep layers of the human psyche sort of geopolitical objectives and achieve them through mind control. And what happens is the population gets lost in metaphysical speculation and all sorts of phantasmagoria and is unable or unwilling, or they have absolutely no idea. They actually begin to believe in these quasi or these sort of spiritual dimensions that get created in their minds, that get implanted there through this very careful profiling of the beliefs of an indigenous population, and then out of that you then can, according to almost a sort of scientific recipe, how you create cults. And this is one. I'm jumping in. Sufi networks and the ideology of Sufism, maybe I'm saying it wrong, as well as the more traditional networks of the Muslim Brotherhood, which I did make a video about how that was also a British project, are an ideological control structure and an inspiration for what is known today as integrism, which, I mean, that term has fallen into disuse, but, always a good thing. Now, this allows me, this term integrism, then I can use it as a sort of a keyword to get in more deeply around this time period for other examples of this and what's behind it generally. Going on, the oligarchy that deploys the integrist movements internationally, an oligarchy which itself actively participates in mystical practices, is currently using Sufism as an obscurantist ideology with the aim of manipulating populations to maintain political control over them. Sufism, as practiced by its believers, especially at the level of the Muslim Brotherhood, is a political doctrine whose goal is to re-Islamize the entirety of Spain, south of France, and Mediterranean islands such as Sicily, Sardinia, and Malta. As an exact ideology, Sufism was defined by Al-Ghazali in the 11th and 12th centuries as a mystical and obscurantist philosophy, violently opposed to the Islamic current of thought represented by the philosopher Ibn Sina, Avicenna, during previous decades. In his works on the quote-unquote necessary being, Ibn Sina had interpreted Islam as a religion elevating man whose destiny, quote-unquote, is to perfect the work of God. So actually not far from the idea of man celebrated during the Italian Renaissance. Man must increase his mastery of nature materially and spiritually, said Avicenna, changing and developing it for the benefit of all mankind, attaining in this way a higher degree of knowledge and of reason. In his book, The Destruction of Philosophy, Al-Ghazali presented a totally different concept of man, not as the master of his own destiny, but as predestined. Reason is denounced there as atheism. The alternative to reason is mysticism, which in Sufi sects is the search for a direct contact with God or his representatives such as Khizr or Khidr, and takes the form of quote-unquote illuminations, often brought about by drug consumption or an artificially induced state of semi-coma, as in the case of the whirling dervishes. Sufism very early became pantheistic, adoring Sufi saints who had been imbued with the special powers transmitted by Khidr. So we see echoes of the manipulation of different religions and belief systems going back to the cults of Dionysus, whereby anything that may be productive, evolutionary, developmental, is trashed and replaced by, or the attempt is to replace it with something that is mystical, obscurantist, irrational, form of irrationalism. Irrationalism has been deployed by various empires that have a kind of through line, right? The series that I'm doing the reading on, it's called Battle Royale, goes into this, how on one side you have strains of thought that lead man higher, sort of the apotheosis, but not attaining godhood, but a kind of a raising of the human condition and human consciousness through a rational, creative reason. And then you have on the other side the deployment of these synthetic cults that favor irrationalism. So just to catch you up on that, this is in line with that. Sufi activity has taken two forms: a life of contemplation or meditation, and a life of proselytizing involving activities in the society at large. Although some Sufi sects have been purely meditative or monastic, most sects have functioned with a meditative center serving as a base. Zawiya, where the sheikh, the sect remains with his closest disciples, Mokaddem, while other disciples travel around the world, either for religious or commercial activities, as in the case of the Tijaniya sect, or for military activities, the Sunusi or Derkawis. The Sufi sects rapidly became very well-informed intelligence networks, so there's the utility. France used the Tijaniya sect in the late 19th century Turkey of Sultan Abdul Hamid, who joined the sect himself in order to become closer to France. Meanwhile, Britain used the services of the Bektashi sect in the Balkans and in Turkey against the Sultan, with the alliance between the Bektashi and the Freemasons. The Freemasons always involved. Later giving power to the Young Turks, which comes out of the Giuseppe Mazzini, Young Italy, and then these young movements in various countries, all springing from this Freemasonic influence, which they were themselves they were ideological cults, deceptions. Going on, Britain adopts Sufism. Since the last quarter of the 19th century, Sufi sects have been collected, especially by the British, who saw in them an obscurantist movement which could be used against Republican and anti-colonial movements then emerging in the Middle East. It's always that. It's always an attempt to throw off or debilitate or replace, retard, honest, thoughtful, workable resistance to colonialism, or the will that might otherwise lead people on a more constructive path, always. Particularly in Egypt and Iran, the British created several Islamic, quote-unquote, reform movements to divert attention away from British colonial rule to the question of the Islamic religion. So don't talk about us, the British. Argue within yourselves about your religion, and then we will help promote, do the dirty business behind the scenes to promote those epistemological constructions that we've guided and that we've promoted that will, the net result will be that these colonies will remain firmly under imperialist control. So I think I've said that enough. Particularly in Egypt and Iran, the British created several Islamic reform movements to divert attention away from colonial rule to the question of Islamic religion. In Egypt, Lord Cromer, later to become a member of the Lord Milner's Round Table, which gave birth to the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which I believe is now called Chatham House. This is what generates American foreign policy, which then gets conduited into the Council on Foreign Relations. But it goes back to Lord Milner's Round Table and Cecil Rhodes, the Rhodes Scholarship, right? They all, these two figures, very powerful, working in tandem. Milner came after, that's right. In Egypt, Lord Cromer created and manipulated the infamous Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani and his disciple Muhammad Abdu, the organization of the Muslim Brotherhood created in 1929 by Hassan al-Banna, himself a member of Qadiriyya, came out of the journals founded by Abdu. A statement from the Iranian Sufi Syed Hossein Nasr, former director of the Pahlavi Foundation, related to the Pallavicini, very powerful Italian noble family with high authority, even over the Windsors, I believe. I know this, okay. From his Sufi essays provides an insider view of the situation. The Muslims of the 19th century, quoting here, denounced Sufism and declared it responsible for the decadence of the Islamic world. They even considered the study of Sufism to be inspired by the colonialists. Bingo! Fortunately for us, since the beginning of the last century, Sufism has undergone a number of reforms. Once again, Sufism exists as the answer to the crisis of our civilization. Always, yes, there's a crisis, and this is the answer. Irrationalism. Before and during World War I, Arnold Toynbee, the historian and member of the British intelligence services, supervised a Sufi project and other operations in the Middle East, out of which came Lawrence of Arabia and the Muslim Brotherhood. At that time, Toynbee was the international director of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, or Chatham House. These same British networks, having created the Muslim Brothers as a force to oppose the British-supported Zionist movement, among other reasons, later spawned Adolf Hitler's Nazi movement and the fascism of Benito Mussolini. It's all incubated out of the same British intelligence Freemasonic cadre. The alliance among Hitler, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and the Muslim Brotherhood was designed in London. Sufism for the 20th century. The Islamic integrism of today is the direct project of a new Sufi project elaborated immediately after World War II in order to make Sufism more universal and operational. This new project transformed Sufism into a universal religion, taking it beyond and subsuming the narrow structure of Islam and including Christianity, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Although Sufism originated in Islam, Sufism was redefined as a religion older than Islam, very clever, having existed in ancient times. Sufism was retooled to encompass psychological questions seen from an unscientific, irrational perspective. Sufism was thus transformed into a universal, ancient, and irrational belief structure, which would bring the Freemasons love those three things together in whatever they do, whether it's environmentalism or Sufism or what have you, which would bring together a whole variety of mystical cults. They just love that. The person designated by the RIIA to accomplish this mission was a certain Idris Shah, an Afghan by origin. His family had served British interests since 1840, when during the first Afghan war, Idris Shah's grandfather, Nawab Syed Amjad Ali Shah, was placed upon the Afghan throne by British troops. Iqbal Ali Shah, Idris's father, was a disciple of the Qadriya sect who became famous for his discovery, in quotes, something suspicious about that maybe, of the tomb of Eve in Saudi Arabia. Among his many writings, he published a book with the revealing title, How to Control the Spirits of Asia. Who would want to do that? Under the control of the RIIA, Idris Shah turned out a stream of books from the middle of the 1950s on. In 1956, his Oriental Magic was published describing witchcraft in Europe and the East. The book was translated into French and distributed in France by the Institute of Anthropology, directed at that time by Louis Marin, a profiler of witch cults, probably a Freemason. Idris Shah's second book, published 1 year later, The Book of Books, consisted of a preface of 2 lines. Now, we'll get back to that. 2 lines. Our introduction of 9 pages, and no less than 236 blank pages. He immediately received profuse praise from the British media, from the Sunday Telegraph to the BBC, all of that being orchestrated as well. The Sufis, published later, became the Bible of the current Sufi movements, plural. In 1965, Idris Shah was named Director of Sufi Studies at Sussex University, a branch of the Tavistock Institute of London. We're very familiar with that. Many videos on that. If you're curious, you could revisit them, or if you don't know anything, please. It's so important. You can't talk about anything of any great importance that's unfolding today without knowing something about Tavistock. Created at the end of the 1930s as the Psychological Warfare Center for the British Intelligence Services. He was also named Director of Studies at the Institute of Cultural Research in London. A few years later, the British and American journals New Statesman, New Society, and the American Scholar ran front-page stories on the revolution of Idris Shah. So not orchestrated at all. From this period on, the teachings of Idris Shah were incorporated into Rand Corporation study programs and projects by a certain J. Kermish and were used in training courses given to American intelligence officers and in universities generally. Always goes out to both of these to infect future generations and to ensconce a policy direction. In 1972, Idris Shah was also named International Director of the Ecumenical Council of Churches in Geneva, coming up in the world. He had previously created the World Sufi Organization and the Society of Sufi Studies from his retreat in the cobblestone village of Tunbridge Wells, south of London. But now he's treading the big boards in Geneva, up there in the Ecumenical Council of Churches. All religions are under the control of the aristocracy. They all serve a purpose. And those purposes are very carefully considered, first of all, in Geneva. Anyway, going on. In honor of Idris Shah, in order to better understand the Idris Shah phenomenon, it is necessary to examine a seminar organized in London in 1972 called In Honor of Idris Shah. There could be found the old British colonial establishment for Middle East affairs, the Anglican religious establishment, always present at these sorts of unveilings, and the establishment of so-called, the Oxford-Cambridge set, Orientalists, working for British intelligence, telling the population what it is, what Orientalism is all about, right? The individuals attending included Sir John Glubb Pasha, former commander of the Arab Legion in Jordan following World War II and founding member of the Anglo-Arab Association of the CAAU, Sir Edwin Chapman Andrew, Knight of the Order of St. John, President of the Royal Central Asian Society and the Committee for Trade with the Middle East, and former ambassador in Khartoum and Beirut, and L.F. Rushbrook Williams, an old friend of the Idris Shah family, Director of Middle Eastern Services for the BBC, and advisor to royal families in the Middle East, advising them on how to stay in line with things that have been worked out for them in the British Foreign Office. The Reverend Sidney Spencer from the University of Oxford attended the seminar representing the religious establishment. The Reverend Spencer was then head of the Department of Comparative Religion and publisher of the Magazine for the Study of Comparative Religions, one of the most important centers of universal Sufism. From the Orientalists, there was A.K. Julius Germanus, a member of the Committee of Hungarian Orientalists and member of the Hungarian Parliament. The seminar unanimously stressed the importance of the works of Idris Shah for the reasons enunciated by Glubb Pasha. Quote, "The public believes that physics can solve human problems and that the human spirit can decide the future of man. We are grateful to Idris Shah for having refuted this lie," unquote. Wow. It sounds, it doesn't sound like it is exactly parallel to an article I was reading yesterday, actually, on Aldous Huxley, which I'll probably do a reading of. You can see how all this stuff works together. Idris Shah's networks. I was reading it to my son. He's a science fiction writer, and so it was very interesting for him. Idris Shah's networks. Idris Shah's activities have served as a cover for the formation of numbers of secret organizations in Europe, organizations which promote drug use and Malthusian ideas. The World Sufi Organization, created in the mid-1960s, has as members both Johannes Witteveen, former head of the International Monetary Fund. What's he doing there? Alexander King, a founding member of the Malthusian Club of Rome, and the former director of the Science and Technology Department of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, in Paris. The World Sufi Organization is made up of small groups of between 10 and 20 people, particularly, quote-unquote, intellectuals. In quotes, probably, because they're all told what to think. They're intellectual prostitutes. They're not real midwives of thought. All right. Inquiries about the Munich organization have revealed that all its members use drugs, hashish, cocaine, and heroin as a routine part of meditation. The Society of Sufi Studies, also known as the Darqawi Institute in Norwich, England, incorporates a Society of Islamic Studies with what a certain Fridtjof Schuon works. Schuon, Alsace, I don't know how to pronounce it, sorry. Schön, I would say Schön, but must be something else. Schön. The native Alsace, now lives in Lausanne, Switzerland. The world headquarters of the Nazi International. I've done a video on that. The Nazi International, yes, headquarters in Switzerland. He is the leader of the Chadiliya sect, active in Switzerland, Spain, Morocco, and Algeria, especially in Mostaganem, where, according to some reports, the sect deals in drugs and arms. There's always this place where drugs are exchanged for arms and arms are exchanged for drugs. They absolutely have to have this dynamic, you know. Like the Bulgarian connection, it was all about that. The Anglo-Americans love this. There always has to be something like this. The Darqawi Institute is the Center of Research for the World of Islam Festival Trust, set up in London in 1976 and headed by Sir Harold Bealey, a former head of the British Secret Services during World War II. Bealey was a founding member of the Council for Anglo-Arab Understanding, CAAU. The vice president of the trust is the United Arab Emirates ambassador to London, Mohammed Al-Tajir. Al-Tajir, who owns a private bank in the Caribbean, has been known for some years as one of the main financiers of the fundamentalist Islamic movements based in Britain and elsewhere, especially the London-based Islamic Council of Europe, led by Salem Azam. Al-Tajir is an associate of the Galadari family of the Union of Middle East Banks in Dubai, and he's become one of the key intermediaries for arms sales to Khomeini's Iran. One of his British partners in these deals, Ian Smalley, was arrested last January, this is 1983, in Dallas, Texas, by the American authorities. Under Al-Tajir's patronage, the World of Islam Festival Trust became a founding member of Islam and the West, an organization created in October 1979 in Geneva. Islam and the West brings together the anti-science networks of Alexander King and Aurelio Peccei's Club of Rome. This is all the zero-growth fetishists. The British Middle East establishment, represented by Sir Harold Bealey, and the Muslim Brotherhood networks around Ma'aruf Dawalibi of the World Muslim Congress. The magazine for the study of comparative religions is directly linked to the World of Islam Festival Trust. Published in Oxford, it preaches the Sufism of René Guénon, a French Sufi who died in Cairo at the beginning of the 1950s. Editors and regular contributors to the magazine include Fridtjof Schuon, Titus Burckhardt, who is also a Swiss Sufi, Martin Links, an English Sufi and director of the National Library in London, and Rama Saraswamy, a Hindu convert to Catholicism who is the official representative of the fundamentalist Christian current of Monsignor Lefebvre in the United States. And he's the one, I think, associated with the Benedictines who helped to organize the assassination attempts against John Paul II. The French disciples of this magazine are to be found in the mysticism review Atlantis, founded during the 1920s by Marechal Liaté, then governor of Morocco. Its representatives today are Robert Amadou, Baroukand, and Raymond Abellio. They operate through the Omega Association, which is the French branch of the Sufi order in the West, set up in 1913 by an Indian Sufi from the Chishti sect, and now led by a certain Pir Velayat, organized a conference in Paris at the end of March with Najmuddin Bamate, an Afghan who is former Director General of UNESCO. Wow. And one of the controllers and manipulators of former Algerian president and Hitler admirer, Ahmed Ben Bella. Bamate arranged Ben Bella's October 1981 trip to the United States, where he was a featured speaker at a major conference of the Muslim Brotherhood at the Rothko Chapel in Houston. Conference participants planned the spread of Islamic fundamentalism through the Arab world, some going so far as to praise the recent assassination of Egypt's Anwar Sadat. So there's like a lot here, but I mean, really what it should, I think the takeaway is this, the ability, how these networks can spread, the scope of them, and the grip on people's psyches, and the way they're so skillfully manipulated and woven by the same cast of villains in the same way. This seminar, held March 18th, 19th, was organized by the Spiritual Colloquium for Peace, 19th session, in the context of a conference on Sufism, which took place on March 20th at UNESCO. Bamate spoke on the 19th of March on Islam and liberation, and on the March 20th on the Sufis, or the sons of the moment. They love phrases like that, meaningless things. Sons of the moment. Pir Vilayat, they're intoxicating, aren't they? Just, wow, who doesn't want to be that? Pir Vilayat Inayat Khan talked about the new ways of thinking. There's another one. Another great resonant phrase, empty rhetoric, hypnotic. And later about Ibn Arabi. Other people attending, including Michel Cazenave of France Culture, the organizer of the Cordoba Conference in 1979 on Science and Conscience, Monsignor Germain of the Orthodox Church in France, and the director of the Tibetan Center of Scotland. They're everywhere. Around this magazine is also the Shamarand Circle, a research seminar on Sufism held during the summer and on weekends. Maybe it's not pronounced like Frenchish, it's maybe Chamarande, where Abdul Qadir Rahmani speaks regularly. Rahmani is the director of the Academy of Berber Studies of the International Third World College, whatever the hell that is, and of the International Agency for Culture. Culture absolutely needs an agency, doesn't it? Just can't make it on its own. A few years later, Rahmani created the Alliance for the Union of Minorities with Jacques Attali, now special advisor to President François Mitterrand, who claims that euthanasia will be policy in all future societies. We see this happening. I've wrung my hands over this too many times. The Alliance for the Union of Minorities is part of the Europe of the Regions movement, attempting to subdivide nations into feudal entities along any and all ethnic and religious lines, making them manageable through things such as these irrationalist cults. And purse strings that are connected to like drugs for arms and arms for drugs and all kinds of just ugly British Anglo-American shenanigans, really, I'm sure, directly connected with the Gladio operations. Sufism and separatism. The direct link between Sufism and present-day separatist movements is ideological as well as organizational. The early writings of Idris Shah elaborate the ideology of separatism in Oriental Magic. He cites magical practices as the basis for defining particular cultures in different European regions, including the Basque, Breton, Catalan, and Berber cultures. The Academy of Berber Studies now publishes the magazine called Amazigh, which mixes real history with the mystical stories of the goddess Athena, of Atlas, Heracles, and other mythical figures. The link between Sufism and separatism is particularly visible in the organization called CIEMEN, Seamen, Center of Studies of Ethnic Minorities, which has these centers and organizations. They really play on, the arrogance and the narcissism of people who have this ongoing fetish for authority, right? And it just puts this veneer that's just irresistible to these preening, fake intellectuals. They can't, this like attracts them like shit attracts flies, right? Which has centers in Barcelona, Perpignan, the Abbey of Saint Michael of Cuxa, on the French-Spanish border, Cuja, maybe. The Faculty of Philology at the University of Milan and in Sicily. The Alliance for the Union of Minorities coordinates its activities with Marcel Terrier, the representative of Seamen in Paris, and former president of the International Association for the Defense of Threatened Cultures and Languages, which publishes the review Ethnica in Milan. Behind this kind of quote-unquote cultural activity are activities of a more military kind. The Abbey of St. Michael of Cuja, led by Father Aurighi Archemi, has served as a safe house for terrorists of Grappo and Gari. So, that's a half step away from Gladio. This is Gladio right now. The kidnapping of the Paris director of the Bank of Bilbao was planned in the abbey itself. Could be Benedictine, probably. In Spain, Seamen collaborates with the Catalan Liberation Front, a split-off, that's how you destabilize countries, nation-states, right? A split-off from the Catalan Socialist Party itself, a split-off from the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, PSOE. These two organizations work closely with the movement for the return of Islam to Spain, created 2 years ago in Cordoba by Ali Ketani of Dawalibi's World Muslim Congress. Ketani is also the director of the Islamic Foundation for Science and Technology, affiliated with Alexander King's IFIAS, and he also heads the Institute for Islamic Minorities. It was in this last capacity that he created a subversive movement in Spain, provoking riots in January of 1982, when he led a Muslim demonstration which attempted to seize the Santa Clara Cathedral in Cordoba in order to transform it into a mosque. That won't cause any problems. The communist mayor of the city had apparently agreed to this change in return for Catani's financing of municipal activities. When Catani's movement was expelled from Cordoba, it moved to Granada, where it collaborates with the Swiss Sufi sect of Fridtjof Schön. Along with the movement for the return of Islam, MRI, the Islamic centers and Spanish Muslim movement operate out of Madrid, Barcelona, Las Palmas, Valencia, and Malaga. These are the centers which welcomed Ben Bella and Roger Garaudi in the fall of 1981. Spain, and Barcelona in particular, Ben Bella admitted in February, is one of his most important sources of funds. He's received many a diamond necklace from there. The Queen's Necklace affair. Played out in miniature all over the place, I'm sure. This says to be continued. Let's see, how are we on time? Oh my God, 41 minutes. There was this box here on, I might as well go for it, right? We were talking about integrist movements for a new dark age. I think this could be important, because that's the goal, the new dark age. The integrist movements threatening national governments in the Mediterranean region, in Central America and other international hotspots are not spontaneous spiritual movements. Okay, in case there was any question at this point. They are the results of decades of developing networks, constructing ideologies, and fostering the use of mind-destroying drugs to build a force to be deployed in just such a period of economic crisis and threaten collapse of national institutions as the present. No time like the present. Look at the United States. In a way, you could almost make the argument that the fentanyl crisis is just such a thing. You know, it's a zombie cult, and it's pure death, and it's synthetic, and it's fast acting. And it has absolutely gutted many American cities. Going on, integrist movements are deployed, as was the Ayatollah Khomeini's force in Iran, to take over secular governments and control entire nations through a particular irrational religious belief structure. Nothing more irrational than fentanyl. These movements, whether ostensibly Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, are totally opposed to technological progress and to the existence of nation states. Indeed, integrism reverts to a concept of man that denies the conception on which Western civilization has been built, common to all three of the great religions, expressed in the command to quote, be fruitful and multiply, replenish and subdue the earth, unquote, and seeks to destroy the modern nation states that have been the foundation of man's economic, scientific, and political progress. Integrism is a religious project and a very precise political project of the international oligarchy, whose political power and vast private fortunes, or fondi, that comes up again. It's an illusion, but it's not metaphorical, I'm fairly positive, are at stake in the current world financial crisis. Civil religious wars are engulfing several nations in Central America already and threatening Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and France and Spain. The nations of North Africa or the Maghreb are particularly vulnerable. Radicalization of relations between immigrant laborers in France and French workers, which is growing, could push the French workers to either Christian fundamentalism or toward fascist movements like the National Front of Jean-Marie Le Pen. Islamic and Christian integrists in France and Spain publicly oppose each other in a deliberate strategy of creating political and religious tension. And this is why this strategy eludes so many people, because they say, oh, that can't be true because those guys are fighting with each other. You know, the way the Venetians first, the oligarchy, the Venetians promoted, got behind and stoked Protestantism and directed it, and then got behind and started the Counter-Reformation. You know, the same people. The fundamentalist cults are tied directly to both the international drug and weapons runners. We talked about that. But also to the Europe of the regions, terrorist operations, whose purpose is to subdivide European nations into a group of tiny and powerless provinces along ostensibly ethnic lines. A single network operating throughout the region of the Western Mediterranean now controls fundamentalist activities of all kinds in the region. This network adapts its activities to local particularities, but all extremist groups are coordinated from the same center. The two main groups, the Sufi networks and the Ben Bella network and the fundamentalists in France and in the Maghreb, are run from above, from Switzerland, by the Nazi International. Decisions are taken to activate or recreate certain ideologies as a political operation only at the very highest levels of these organizations or these networks by the British Royal Institute for International Affairs, by the directors of the International Monetary Fund, and of the World Malthusian movement that created the Club of Rome. On a lower level, there are the figures deployed to make the new ideology concrete, including Idris Shah, the quote-unquote founder, the appointed, the boob of 20th century Sufism. The lowest level includes those whose task is to apply the new ideology, use it to proselytize and be involved in the daily activities of such groups as the Movement for the Return of Islam in Spain. In Europe, fundamentalism is led by the faction of the Blue Army of Fatima, associated with the Lefebvre movement, of the former Portuguese royal family, the Braganzas, and the Tradition Family and Property, TPF. In Brazil, groups involved in the two assassination attempts against Pope John Paul II. They were involved, as well as the Benedictines, I think, and Lefebvre. In France, Professor Jerome Lejeune, a close associate of the TPF organization in France, and a member of the World Federation of Doctors for Life, an organization committed to reestablishing the kingdom of God on earth, based on genetic heritage. Yikes, what could that be? Leads the Christian fundamentalist movement with historian Pierre Chaunou, a member of the political mystical group called Maastra. Chaunou did not hesitate to play the card of integrism when he recently launched a call for no more mosques in France. The Maastra was created in 1978 by Olivier Giscard d'Estaing, chairman of the 29th of April Paris Conference on Islam and the West, patronized by Prince Mohammed al-Faisal of the Dar al-Mal al-Islami Bank, the financier of Islamic fundamentalist movements in the Middle East and Europe. We have cut off some typos, and we had all my mispronunciations. But just to remind you, this is from 24th of May, 1983. So extrapolate all that you possibly can to understand the world of today.